Good evening, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed the powerful visual artwork from artists who were formerly incarcerated. I am Joaquin Mobley, Motus JustUs project strategist, a JustUs monologist, and the vice president of community works, as well as a serial entrepreneur. It is great to be with the district attorney's office for Colorado's 17th Judicial District and present a monologue from Motus Theater's JustUs project.
And my name is Tania Chaitis. I am an undocumented immigrant, a monologist in Motus's Undocu America series, and the Undocu America strategist for Motus Theater, where we create original theater to facilitate dialogue on critical issues of our time. We use the power of art to build alliances across diverse segments of our community. And before we begin, we want to acknowledge that although we are coming to you live from many different locations, today we want to honor that Colorado stands on the land of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and the Ute.
We also want to acknowledge that there are ongoing struggles with racism, health, and economic fears, or having beloved family and friends in prison who are experiencing greater exposure to COVID-19.
So before we begin the scheduled programming, let's all just take 3 collective deep breaths to ground ourselves. Ready? Inhale. Exhale. A second time. And last inhale. Exhale.
Wonderful. We are excited to share with you tonight stories from Motus Theater's Just Us Tour, where people who have experienced incarceration share stories about its impact on their lives so we can reflect and take action. They were created in a Motus monologue workshop in collaboration with Motus artistic director, Kirsten Wilson.
One of Motus's strategies for the Just Us tour to strengthen our community and our country is to present allied performances called shoebox stories, where we ask people who are often in positions of public leadership in our communities and our country to stand in the shoes of a Just Us Motus monologist and read their story aloud. Prior to each performance, the guest reader meets with a monologist who shares their story with them as a sort of ritual to pass on the weight of the story. Then, during the performance, the guest reader reads aloud the story back to the monologist. The readers don't need to agree with everything they read in the story. They just need to be willing to suspend judgment, model courageous empathy, and see the world for a moment through someone else's eyes.
Absolutely. Tonight, you will hear Brian Mason, District Attorney for Adams and Broomfield Counties, model civic hospitality and deep listening by stepping into my shoes for a moment by reading aloud my personal story. After the reading, he and I will reflect together on the impact of his reading.
We're also excited that throughout this evening, we have the pleasure of listening to the music of Colorado's acclaimed a cappella group, Spirit of Grace, who you may have heard singing the national anthem for a Denver Nuggets game or even on tour with the Flowbots. They're amazing. They offer this music as restorative medicine. We hope that when they sing to the monologist, you will know they are also singing for you. So let their music inspire you so that we all leave tonight more ready for the work ahead to support true justice in our community. And right now, Spirit of Grace will start by singing Motus's theme song from Shoebox Stories by Carlos Heredia that honors our time together today.
Thank you so much, Nia. In honor of our artists and all of our monologists, undocumented and justice, we would like to do this in both English and Espanol. If you could just for a moment take a walk in my shoes, yeah. Feel the weight of my burden, oh yeah. And see the world as I do. Maybe then we'll find a way to live a life where each can say, I respect who you are. Yeah. So take a moment to refrain from all the judgment and the pain and hold my story for a while. Si pues por un momento caminar mi camino, sentir el peso de mi carga y ver el mundo como yo. Así vamos a encontrar la manera de hablar y decir yo te respeto. Toma un momento sin rencor, sin todo el juicio y el dolor de mi historia por un tiempo. If you could just for a moment, let me walk in your shoes. Oh, live the life that you do, neighbor. I live the life that you do. Oh, neighbor, then I'll understand. Despite our difference, take your hand and now respect who you are. I take this moment to refrain from any judgment and my pain and hold your story for a while. And hold your story for a while. And hold your story for a while. If you could just a moment, take a walk in my shoes.
Thank you so much, Spirit of Grace. We're going to begin, but first I'll put in the chat a link to support Motus Theater. We did not charge tickets to this event, but we think that after you hear these stories, you will want to support our work so we can bring these stories to schools, theaters, churches, communities everywhere across Colorado and our country. And without further ado, Motus JustUs monologist Joaquin Mobley.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. First and foremost, I just want to dedicate this presentation today to my beautiful 3 kids as well as my wife-to-be. I feel like when every time we get a chance to share these stories, it's really a chance for me to share my plight, but offer up solutions. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the wonderful District Attorney, Brian Mason. He will be reading my autobiographical monologue. So without further ado, Brian, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Joaquin. It's an honor to be with you tonight and with everyone else. It's really important to me as the district attorney to see the criminal justice system through multiple perspectives, not just my own. And it's particularly important for me to see it through the eyes of someone like you, Joaquin, who has been through the system and has been impacted by it for your entire life. And now I'll read Joaquin Mobley's autobiographical monologue entitled Unhirable. It's late fall, 2002, and I'm 18 years old, full of strength and light. I tripped all the way from Washington Heights in Manhattan to Flushing, Queens, the last stop on the 7 train. Down to my last, I traveled to Home Depot to be interviewed for a job. Filled with hope and cloaked in desperation, I walked in to meet my potential new employer. His name was Sheldon. We interviewed and I killed it. I killed it. I'm sure Sheldon felt my hunger. I detected his Caribbean accent and I tried to find common ground, being that my father was from that part of the world. And I too was raised in that culture of hard work. He bought in on me working there. He told me how much I was going to love the job and that I would make good money. Sheldon then took my social security number and stepped behind his desk to run it through the system. I would not let myself feel anything but confident as he typed in the 9 digits that would determine my possibilities. I insisted on the image of him returning to me with his hand held out, ready to shake, and that I would return to my abuela with the reassurance of a new job. I had to. Earlier that morning, the stakes had been raised. I had been startled awake. The sounds of bachata music, sobbing, police sirens, and soft conversation between 2 individuals outside my building discussing the terms and conditions of the pre-purchase of narcotics. But those sounds are not what woke me up. The noise of my neighborhood had become my background music, and in a weird way, it helped me sleep better. I could usually drown out even the loudest of those sounds, but that morning had been different. Something was wrong. There was no sweet, beautiful aroma of fried yucca, eggs, and onions that my abuela makes for me and my abuelo every morning. Nor did I hear the sound of Telemundo coming underneath my bedroom door. When I opened the door to my room, still halfway asleep, I discovered that the sobbing sound that I had grown immune to was coming not from outside, but from our family living room. It was my abuela who was sobbing. I ran to her side and kneeled down in front of her. ¿Qué estás pasando, abuela? She handed me 2 letters, one for my abuelo, stating that he would not receive his Social Security for another year, and another from public housing, informing my grandparents that because I was on probation for a felony drug conviction, I had to leave my home or my entire family would be evicted. It's amazing what a day brings and takes from us in our poverty-stricken communities. Just the night before, I had a feeling of stability and hope. After all, I had an actual interview for a job. Do you know how many applications an 18-year-old Black man has to fill out before they even get an interview? It was going to happen. My baby's mothers needed money for diapers and food, and I was going to have it. But now, looking at those letters and my abuela sobbing, the challenge was overwhelming. I didn't need just enough to support my kids and to start college. I now needed enough for rent, a security deposit, and utilities, or hold the possibility of being homeless. And I had to figure out how to help my abuela pay her rent with no Social Security coming in. So once again, despite the vision that I had gathered for myself in jail of getting a job, making it to college, and staying out of the drug game, I was having to consider going back into it and possibly risking my freedom and my life. In the last year, I had already lost 2 friends, murdered over rivalry for selling territory. Trying to stay strong for my abuela, I kissed her and walked away to prepare for my interview at Home Depot in a new state of mind, one now heavy with threat and despair. But you can't let people see that and think that they will hire you. I showered and dressed and used every item of clothing I put on to build me up, to regain my hope so I could get on that train and feel it all somehow working out. So there I was, sitting in Sheldon's office, practically praying, when his head finally reemerged from behind his computer screen. But by just looking at his face, I could tell immediately that everything had changed. I was now dead to him, or at least untouchable. He wouldn't even look at me. The numbers had rolled out, and I was officially unhirable. I started talking fast, trying to regain my ground. I told him I could be on a probation period or something like that I needed this job to take care of my kids. I shared what I was up against economically. He was unmoved, and his response to my sob story was just, sorry. But I was not going home without a job. Please, Sheldon, listen. I'm trustworthy. I'm an honorable man. I'm asking for a shot, an opportunity, and a chance. He just looked at me, impervious to what I was going through, and asked that I leave the premises. I left, not only the premises, but New York. My mom lived out in Colorado Springs, and I hoped to find work through her connections and stay out of the drug game. When I got to Colorado, I was surrounded by job offers in the community, none of them legal. Did you know that according to the Brookings Institute, a Black man without a criminal record is less likely to get called back for a job than a white man who checked the felony box? I went to prison in 2006 and was given twice the time for the same crime as the two white men who went up in front of the judge before me. That startled me awake, even more than the cries of my abuela. I was awake and angry with the injustices of it, and fierce with an intention of alchemy to take all the steel, concrete, brutality, and disregard they gave me as DOC number 147388 and turn it into my own armor. I may have to fight to survive, but I will not be your entertainment. I am not your victim, and I will not let you make me your victim. Every day I gave myself a new challenge to help me keep my focus and sanity. First, I built up my chest and biceps. Then I learned how to read and write in the language of my abuelos, Spanish. After that, I learned to read Arabic, the language of the Black leaders in prison who were resisting with self-respect, self-love, and prayer. I re-enrolled in college and got several certifications despite all the obstacles to getting an education in prison. And even with this arsenal of strengths, it was hard to stay out of prison when I was finally released. They let me out with just $10 in my pocket, no fresh clothes, and no hope. I almost didn't make it, despite my nearly 10 years preparing for that very moment. But I did. And now I work to support other people coming out of our prison system, guiding them as they take the skills they learned in illegal economies and transform themselves into entrepreneurs with legal opportunities. Because this system wastes our brilliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Joaquin Mobley, as well as DA Brian Mason. And now I want to bring back Spirit of Grace, who will sing their musical response to Joaquin Mobley's story. While they're singing, please share with the panelists and all attendees in the chat a few thoughts about what most impacted you as you heard District Attorney Brian Mason read Joaquin Mobley's story. Here's Spirit of Grace.
Joaquin, every time we hear your story, we are reminded that everybody deserves a chance. And what you've done with your chance is reach out, make a way and a difference for someone else. And it's humbling, and we're very grateful to be able to share in that with you. If I could help somebody as I pass along. If I could help somebody with a word or a song, if I can show somebody that they're traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. If I could help somebody with a word or a monologue, then my living shall not be in vain.
Thank you so much to Spirit of Grace for just, again, gracing us with your musical inspiration to keep moving towards justice. And of course, thank you, Joaquin, for sharing your story and just helping transform the criminal justice system. And District Attorney Brian Mason, who modeled civic hospitality by deeply listening and reading the words of a person whose life was impacted by the criminal justice system. Those of you on Zoom will actually now see a poll sort of pop up on your screen asking the level of impact of hearing this story. Take a moment to submit your answer. And in the meantime, I'll highlight some of the powerful reactions to hearing the story Joaquin shared that y'all wrote in the chat. And I already saw that some people were sharing the impact of hearing the statistic from the Brookings Institute, as well as just general responses to the atrocity of the lack of support that Joaquin had when he was released. And then a lot of y'all feeling very moved by his determination and for his ability to share his story. Thanks, y'all, for sharing those in the chat. I would like to now move to ask the DA Mason a question. What most impacted you as you read Joaquin Mobley's story aloud today?
Thank you, Tanya. It was really emotional for me to read that story. I could feel the emotion building up in my body as I was reading it. And I think what was profoundly impactful to me was, as I was reading his story and his words, feeling his desperation in that moment to provide for his abuela, for his children, and the sense of despair when Sheldon looked at a number, social security number, and saw some history and dismissed him. That was very profound for me.
Thank you, DA Mason. And I would actually love to ask the same question to Joaquin Mobley. What most impacted you about having your story read today by DA Brian Mason?
Yeah, just the fact that he was able to really, step in my place and kind of stand in my shoes and read the story with such like sentiments and such feelings, and it was like you could feel it like he was really there. And that alone is really what's going to keep this dialogue going, and just keep this push and this fight for, some of the Department of Incorrection going on. So thank you, DA Mason. I appreciate you.
It's a privilege, Joaquin. It's a privilege to engage with you and to have read your story, truly.
Thank you. Thank you both. And I do have another question for you, DA Mason, specifically from the dignity of your professional role as the DA of the 17th Judicial District. How do you hold Joaquin's story?
I think as the elected district attorney, what really stuck out to me and what really impacts me was his inability to get a job after serving his time. He had served his time. And my job is to, what I always say are the two pillars of my job is to make the community safe and to make the criminal justice system better. And it doesn't make our community safe if when someone has served their time and they get out of prison, they can't get a job. And it certainly doesn't make our criminal justice system better. So that is a powerful example of the failures of our criminal justice system. And the statistic that was read about from the Brookings Institute is a powerful example of systemic racism. It just is. You just can't hear that statistic and possibly deny it. So as a public official, when I read those words and thought about the fact that even after serving his time, he couldn't turn his life around because he wasn't given the chance. And he genuinely thought about having to return to a life that had put him in prison, a life of having to turn to drugs or to dealing drugs. And I don't know exactly what, Joaquin, and I don't want my words to be put in the place of yours, but the monologue powerfully talks about how you thought about it and you had to because you needed to put food on your table. That's a failure of the criminal justice system.
Thank you. And Joaquin, before we go on to Q&A, is there anything you would like to share as well?
Absolutely. I just want everybody to know out there that this is a community safety issue, right? So it doesn't just affect, the small pockets of the community that I come from, as well as my colleagues. It also affects, people outside of our community. You know what I mean? This is now becoming an issue across the nation and across the world. The only way we're going to combat this is to work together collectively as a community and continue to try to co-elevate. So just keep that in mind, while you resonate or you really just take in and absorb the story. What can we do together as a community to really build one another up and keep us from going in and making these bad decisions or going down that wrong path? Thank you.
Thanks, Joaquin. And I'm sure people do have lots of questions that they'll bring up, which we can now do in a short Q&A. So
Tanya, can I add one more thing? I'm
Oh
sorry.
yeah,
Could I just add one more
absolutely.
thing? I want to just add one more thing to that last statement. The failure of our society to give someone a chance after they get out of prison or after they've served their time isn't just a failure of the criminal justice system. It's a broader failure of our whole society. And so while we have to have conversations about inequities in the criminal justice system, we have to have that conversation. It can't just be limited to the criminal justice system. there's a greater responsibility on the community and our society as a whole and other institutions to make sure that when someone has served their time, they can get a job, they can get housing, so that they're not going back into the criminal justice system. And that starts, honestly, way before the moment that we're talking about. It has to start in school. It has to start with our families and young people, our education system. So I guess as an addendum to your question, what impacted me as an elected DA, it's not just the failures of the criminal justice system in this regard, but a broader failure and the broader work we all have to do as a society to address this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for adding. We do now have time for a short Q&A. So if you're listening, please go ahead and submit your questions either in the chat or the Q&A feature or the Facebook Live comments, and it'll reroute its way to me. And while we wait for you to submit those questions, I know some have started pouring in. We thought you might want more facts and information about the criminal justice system and how you can be an agent for change. So in the chat, you will find a link to action suggestions that organizations who are working on reforming the criminal justice system recommend. And there's lots of more statistics, lots of fact sheets linked in there, as well as information from local organizations and how you can get involved. So thank you for checking that out. You'll also find a link to contribute to Motus Theater so that we can continue doing performances like these across Colorado and our country. And I'll definitely start posing some of the questions that y'all have shared in the chat. But I will have to read through some of them since there's a lot of you. Let's start with maybe, I mean, I don't know if this is easier than the rest, but Joaquin, there's one specifically for you. How did you turn it around? Did someone eventually give you a job?
I would like to say that the reason why I turned it around is I had a really good conversation with my daughter when I was released. And she said, Dad, we stuck with you this time, but if you go back, me and my sister were not staying around. And so that really woke me up. So that was really like the impetus for me really to get it together. And yeah, fortunately, a Muslim brother of mine who I was incarcerated with, he used to just observe me and see how I carried myself in there. And when he got out, he had a job opportunity for me, and it actually helped me get on my feet. Absolutely. It was a community concerted effort.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I know everyone's always curious, like what happens after the monologue ends? There's a couple questions that are a little bit more like about policies. So there's, how can we hold judges accountable for sentencing disparities? And then I saw there was another one about, well, we'll do that separately. So can either of you maybe talk a little bit about judges and how we can hold them accountable in this whole system?
Joaquin, do you want to go first or would you like me to?
No, sir, go ahead.
So that's an important question. Judges, of course, are supposed to play a neutral and unbiased role. And when they sentence, they're supposed to look at the facts and other factors when making their decisions. And yet there's no question that we have an over-incarceration problem in this country and that it disproportionately impacts men and women of color. And certainly judges play a role in that, as do prosecutors, which is why I'm here. In terms of how to hold judges accountable, that's a hard question for a DA like me to answer because I appear in front of judges. And I know from personal experience that the judges that I practice in front of are women and men of integrity. But I do believe that sharing information and getting the word out about disparities and sharing statistics and sharing personal stories is impactful to a judge just as it is impactful to me as a DA. And I think that would go a long way towards addressing that part of this challenge.
Absolutely. I would like to echo that. It's really sharing stories. I believe, unfortunately, a lot of the judges and even some of the DAs, lawyers, the justice system are kind of unaware of some of the disparities just because they're steeped in it and they're working every day. So there's some things that they're unaware of. So I believe, for me personally, I take it as my job to try to, give them information and, have them at least acknowledge that that there are disparities there, and we need to work on that better collectively. Um, so I think also, inviting them to read stories like this, so that they can actually, sit in it and stand in it and have time to reflect. So I think that's how we get them to hold themselves accountable. But in that same breath, uh, when I was going through my trials and tribulations with the justice system, um, I had something that really woke me up. I was actually going through what they call a mediation hearing. And in that mediation hearing is when a retired judge steps in and he tries to mediate. And essentially, he's like a broker. He tries to broker a better deal for you. And when I told him of all the, the issues that I had in my case, he said, "You're absolutely right." He said, "Well, Joaquin, I'm going to be very honest with you, young man." He said, "You're young, you're Black, and you're in Colorado. Do you really want to risk going to trial and getting the rest of your life in prison?" And everybody, when I told my mother about that situation, she was like, "Oh, the audacity of him saying that." But I was like, I don't have no ill regard towards him. He told me the truth. Like, that's the system that we're in. So just knowing that and acknowledging that and working on it collectively, I think we can really start getting some of these disparities broken down.
Definitely. Thank you. Um, there is a question around, there's a couple questions actually around action items, but I'll start with the one about housing. So understanding that housing costs have risen by 457% over the last 31 years, while wages have only risen by about 66%. Do you think that a focus on affordable housing and a livable minimum wage would have relieved some of the pressure on your family? And perhaps I could even broaden that, like, what are some of the other factors that are sort of playing in this conversation as well?
I'll answer. Yeah, definitely housing plays in a lot into this whole situation, right? For instance, my situation, you know what I mean? If I didn't leave my grandparents' house, I would have risked all of us being homeless. So affordable housing is definitely very important. I think how it's implemented definitely needs to be in question. Um, Personally, community works the way what we're doing is we're trying to get contracts with local hotels to offer people that are transitioning from prison at least a place to stay until they can gather themselves, save up enough money, and get on their feet. Also, in addition to that, some of the affordable housing that's available to people from my community, um, they're absolutely saying that if you stay in our housing and you're getting reduced rent, a man can't stay here, right? So I think that's problematic in itself, in its essence. I think that we need to be working on trying to keep some of these families together and acknowledge the fact that because some of us are not making enough money to pay rent, that as a family we need to work on how we're going to save money together and stay together. And it seems like the other way that they've been implementing it is kind of pushing the men out of the family because they can't stay in the household.
I'll just add to that, Tanya, that I think this is an example of what I was referring to earlier, and that is that the problem is beyond just the criminal justice system. Housing policy makes a difference. Affordable housing is critical for everyone, but certainly for people who have served their time and come out and who need a place to live. So it's a real issue. It's also a real challenge. Anyone who's living in Colorado right now knows what the housing market is doing. And so it's a problem without a simple solution, but nevertheless one we need to work on.
Thank you both. I'm trying to summarize all the questions that are coming in, but actually, I think the one that it just popped in would be a good one to start with. It says, we've seen a wave of progressive DAs from non-traditional backgrounds in the last 5 years, for example, Larry Krasner and Philly, who have been campaigning on reducing mass incarceration instead of being tough on crime. How much of a difference does this make?
Joaquin, I'll take that one first, and then you can go if you're okay with that, sir. I think the jury is still out, to use a legal analogy. I think we're still waiting to see what kind of an impact it has made. I can tell you personally that, again, my two pillars are keeping the community safe and making the criminal justice system better. And I don't believe those two are mutually exclusive. I think they go hand in hand. And so I don't necessarily think that it's progressive to say that when someone gets out of prison, they need to be able to get a job. I think that's pro-community safety. It's not just progressive or liberal to say that once someone has served their time, that they need to have a roof over their head and be able to provide for their family. So I do envision the role of district attorney in a broader sense than perhaps previous district attorneys have, or district attorneys of the past, because I don't see my job at all as simply prosecuting crime. That's part of it. But I also see a big part of my job as prevention of crime, and more importantly, improving the criminal justice system in such a way that we don't have people coming through the courthouse doors at all.
Absolutely. I would love to echo what DA Brian Mason just said, as far as that they're not mutually exclusive, right? So they work in tandem, right, as far as community safety. But yeah, I mean, I think that the wave, so to speak, I guess if that's the term we're using, of progressive DAs, I think is very important and impactful. And the reason why is because when I was going through my situation and a lot of my colleagues, it felt like the district attorneys that at least that we had, that we were dealing with, were really trying to give us the most, the maximum on every case and every charge. And it was like, it felt like that was happening as a like, so we can bargain down to something, right? So there wasn't really no questioning on what led us to commit the crime or what positions were we in. None of that was really taken into consideration. It was like, you broke the law, we're going to try to give you as much time as possible. And if you don't want to take that, we're willing to negotiate, but you're going to have to do an exorbitant amount of time.
Thank you. Thank you, Joaquin. Thank you, DA Mason. I want to ask the last sort of questions altogether. But I will just say thank you so much to everyone who's put different resources in the chat, like highlighting different places people can go for more answers to their questions. Thank you for that. For these last few questions, people are really wondering about two main themes. How do we prevent more people from being incarcerated? So there was a question around addressing mandatory sentencing, as well as what do we do with the people who are currently being released from prison? How do we prevent them from going through all the challenges that Joaquin shared? So both of those, like pre and post, if y'all could address that.
Joaquin, you want to go first this time?
Sure. Absolutely. So pre incarceration, there's a lot of great initiatives out there in the community right now. Transforming Safety is one that I'm a part of. Well, our organization, Community Works, is a part of. Essentially, it's catching people when they're going down that, I guess, for lack of a better term, bad path, and kind of redirecting their focus, getting them back involved and engaging in positive activities, pro-social activities, and just restoring that self-confidence in them and giving them core purpose. Also, for those that do veer off the right path, offering restorative justice. I'm a big restorative justice advocate. So it's when the individual gets in trouble, when I feel like that individual needs us most, and really coming around that individual as a community and reminding how great the individual is, and then really just getting them to buy into themselves, right? So I really push restorative justice. Post release, I think making that transition for the individual as seamless as possible. Like for instance, with Community Works, we start working with the individuals that are getting released up to 6 months before they get out, with the intentions of having a job for them on the day of their release, as well as having some housing, a cell phone, Medicaid, and if at all possible, at least food stamps so that they have something to put in their stomach, and something healthy, preferably. So those are some of the things that we're working on and have been implementing for about 3 years now.
In terms of pre-incarceration or addressing over-incarceration in general, I don't think we can have this conversation without talking about mental health. We have a mental health crisis in this country. It disproportionately impacts the criminal justice system. And a huge number of people who come into the criminal justice system have mental health struggles. And that's both those who commit or are accused of committing crimes and those who are victimized of crimes. And we can't forget to talk about those who have been victimized either, because that is a significant factor when we talk about community safety and making the criminal justice system better. When someone has been victimized, they didn't ask for that. They're brought into the criminal justice system against their will. And we have to seek to make them whole too, because unfortunately, similarly, frankly, to those who have come out of the criminal justice system and then can't get a job or can't get housing, sometimes people who have been victimized have mental health struggles that then cause their lives to go in a downward spiral too. So I don't think we can really have a complete conversation about preventing more incarceration without addressing the mental health crisis in this country. In terms of, I know the questioner asked about sentencing and mandatory sentences. And my response on that is that I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that question. There are some crimes. And in this society where the person who has committed them truly does pose a danger to the community. And although I don't like sending anyone away, sometimes it's the appropriate response. What we have to do, though, is look at those as a whole, as an aggregate, and decide as a community and as a state, what are the crimes that we think deserve what sentence? And what are the alternatives to incarceration? When is it appropriate to have a community corrections response, or probation, or restorative justice, or a diversion program, or sometimes a dismissal of the case? And that is my job as the district attorney, and I think it's the job of district attorneys all over, is to do the right thing in every case and to keep talking about that, keep talking about how our job is to do the right thing. When Joaquin says in his case in New York, the DA essentially started at the maximum sentence and then was willing to negotiate down. That's not what DAs should be about. What we should be about is, again, keeping the community safe. And sometimes that does mean having to take somebody out of society, but also making the criminal justice system better and making victims whole. And it's a big challenge, but one that we have to address, and we have to address, as we've discussed throughout this conversation, racism in the criminal justice system and how that impacts disproportionate sentences. So it's a big question, and it's one that policymakers have to wrestle with, and it's one that DAs have to wrestle with, and people with lived experiences like Joaquin have to be part of that conversation. I can tell you, just to try to end tonight on a little bit of an optimistic note, that our policymakers, of which I am one in Colorado right now, are wrestling with these issues. And we're looking at the entire criminal code, all of the misdemeanors were looked at in this past year. And right now, some of my fellow elected DAs, as well as defense attorneys and other experts in this field, are looking at the felony code and looking at sentencing and looking at truth in sentencing. And I'm optimistic and hopeful that we're going to make progress in this area, but we do have a long ways to go.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, for both of you. And for our wonderful audience, for all of your questions. I know there's probably so much more that you wanted to know, but I do want to make sure we have enough time to hear more music and sort of soothe the soul after so many difficult questions that are out in the world right now about incarceration. And so I just wanted to say thank you. And I hope you will also all take a moment to answer a brief poll question about the Q&A that'll sort of also pop up on your screen. And before we end with a song from Spirit of Grace, is there anything that DA Mason or Joaquin that you would like to say to each other before we end this time together?
Joaquin, I'd just like to tell you how grateful I am that you are willing to put your story out there, that you give me the honor of being able to read the story publicly, and that you are engaging with your community and the state on these important issues. It's really powerful to me personally and impactful to our whole community. And I'm just truly grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just like to thank DA Mason for taking the time out of his busy schedule to really just kind of, step in my shoes for a little bit and kind of understand my plight. And I hope that it can be of some influence, when you're doing your day-to-day job, and helping us, specifically my community, fight through this ongoing battle with the criminal justice system. So just thank you, and I appreciate you.
Beautiful. Thank you both. And now I want to welcome back Spirit of Grace, who are going to sing one final song for us. While they sing, we would love our participants and you in the audience to please close your eyes and just take this time to really imagine a system of true justice in our country. Spirit of Grace will then lead you to open your eyes and write into the chat a few words that express this vision of true justice while they continue singing. So please make sure these words are shared with all attendees and panelists so that we can all enjoy your words for the justice we're going to work together to create. Thank you so much, and welcome back, Spirit of Grace.
La, 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 la. La, 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 la.
Please close your eyes and imagine a world in the future with us right now. I know you're at home, but don't be embarrassed. Take your time and imagine with us. Imagine there's real justice. I wonder if you can. No separate rules for others. Yeah. Imagine man is man. Imagine all the people living in harmony.
Imagine there is fairness. First time it's ever been. Imagine there's a future. Imagine sin is sin. Oh, imagine all the people living for today.
Now, we ask you right now to open your eyes. In the chat, you have an opportunity to say a few words about what you're imagining, about what justice looks like. Imagine what true justice could even look like. Please post your comments in the thread as we sing.
What's the point of hoping if you never pray? And what's the point of loving if you'll never stay? Blood on the cross if you've never gone astray, or mistakes if you never plan to change. You see, you're proud of your knowledge, but do you know yourself? Your energy is spent trying to be somebody else. We're all the same, so unless you're from space, there's a million variations. But human is the race. You're turning on the faith that delivered you, and you don't even understand the hate you contribute to. It's madness. It shouldn't be defended. You and me, we have to answer for the fates we surrender to.
You may say that I'm a dreamer,
but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world be as one.
Hope you took a time to reflect and imagine what the world would be like if I was just a woman and you were just a man, and we were just everything that we had dreamed, imagined, and planned.
Thank y'all so much. Y'all are amazing. Everyone just do the Zoom clapping for Spirit of Grace. Let me just share a few of the words that I see in the chat and just a couple of the phrases. I see empty prisons, families not torn apart, authentic human communication, systemic compassion, radical love, fairness, all the resources, respect, so many resources of love and support. And you can keep sharing your visions in the chat. Thank you all. I also want to highlight DA Mason said, true justice for me is to fully live up to the creed, equal justice under the law. That is my fervent wish for our community, our state, and our country. I see education first, radical compassion, love. I'm like pausing for 30 more seconds to see if other ones pop up. Wraparound care. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. This definitely concludes our program for today. I just want to say on behalf of Motus Theater, we want to again thank Joaquin Mobley and Colorado's 17th Judicial District Attorney, Brian Mason. We would also like to thank Motus's powerful contributing artists, including Motus Theater's artistic director, Kirsten Wilson, and singers Spirit of Grace.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. And if you were moved by this presentation, we hope you will contribute to Motus Theater and share the video of this event with others. We will send you all of you a link to this performance in a few days, in addition to the survey link, so you can share your feedback with Motus. With heart and gratitude, let's work together to revision justice in our country.
Thank you all and have a great night.